I would like to invite Petr Morée from the Department of the Church History at the Charles University at the Protestant faculty. Petr Morée is historian and theologian who lives in the Czech Republic for a long time, and he is one of the most renowned historians about the Czech history. So I'm pass the floor to you, and I will switch to the PowerPoint presentation.
So, good morning to all of you on site or online or wherever. I'm happy to give this talk about actually the wider topic of nation, nationalism and religion. I think there is where this talk fits in. And yesterday, when I was preparing this, I saw just on the Guardian's internet site, the former secretary of the former secretary of the United States says Israel has a biblical claim to Palestine. Now, there are a lot of discussions to be held on that, but there is certainly something in this statement that he made in a podcast actually that fits into our discussion, and perhaps it is one of the two most urgent cases that we should discuss when we talk about these issues. The first one would be Ukraine. The second one, I think, is at this point the situation in Israel and Palestine. Therefore, we first have to say something about biblical narratives on nation and territory. Secondly, we have to say something about what Christian traditions say on these issues. What sort of narratives do we find there? And thirdly, how does the Reformation work with this? Or how was the Reformation used in this, or misused perhaps? In general, I prefer rather the term instrumentalization over misuse for a simple reason. The word instrument is there. And it means, or it indicates that religion is being instrumentalized, is used as an instrument for another goal. And I think that's the main issue that we have to discuss. In biblical theology, or in theological concepts that we find in the Bible, we find roughly three, let's say, emphases when it comes to nation or something like nation. In the first place, it's this triad: God, nation, land. God has chosen his nation, has led it to the promised land, has a covenant with this chosen nation, and there is some sort of exclusivity there, and the covenant also includes claims on especially territory. This is a concept of nation that plays a role, especially in in the so-called ethnic concept of nation, or in other words, what in German is called the Kulturnation. Nevertheless, when we then, this is very much focusing or coming from the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, when we then read the prophets, then we see also this sort of more messianistic aspect, if we want, namely that the chosen people have to be a light to the others, to lead the others, or to especially reveal what is the true God about. So there is a little bit of some sort of universal aspect there. The New Testament notion of community stresses faith and baptism. Communities shared, formed by or based on a shared belief. and also obviously a practice. This community has the task to go out and to gather the others. So there is this mission aspect. We have to take in the others as well. Especially in the Middle Ages, but it started basically from Constantine the Great onwards, we have this concept then in church history of the Translatio Imperii, which means that Christian empires are basically something like a continuation of the Old Testament empire of David. So the Roman emperors, as far as they were Christians or saw themselves as Christians, or later medieval emperors, they saw themselves as basically the heirs of David's realm. In the 19th century, or late 18th century then, these various aspects were included in a concept that perhaps found its sort of origin in the philosophy of Johann Gottfried Herder. Nations are God-given, nations are created, and they therefore have also a destiny, but every nation has a destiny. It's not just one nation that has a destiny, but there is this notion also that some smaller ones might not have either the opportunity or perhaps the power, but certainly also not the mission to lead the others, whereas large nations do. For Herder, that means especially those two large nations, the Slavs and the Germans. These various concepts, as they worked out in church history, caused or are related to a problem of tolerance. The tolerance issue, or the problem of that, is a result of the claims in the Christian notions concerning truth, and then therefore also concerning identity. There can be only one true identity, let's say, if we would exaggerate that, and therefore all others are either less valid or have to be included or absorbed in the main notion of identity. Other concepts, either Christian concepts, either non-Christian concepts, they are also always seen as different, not only different on the factual level, but different as in quality. And eventually they have to be discriminated, or are discriminated and suppressed. Of course, that's the position of Jews, of Muslims in modern societies or pre-modern societies. Then the concept or the step two, or the aspect of mission. We have to missionize classically they said the heathens, the pagans. They have to be converted, or so we can also say they have to adapt themselves to us, and eventually they have to assimilate. So there is not much room for a different type of, or a diverse type of identity. And the pre-modern idea, especially from the 17th century onwards, has this strong sense of that Christian nations are to rule over others, especially over others on the other continents. So we are bringing them to true light. That's the first part. Now we make the second step, or actually the third one, and we go to what Reformation was in this whole set of problems. When we talk about Reformation identity, or how the Reformation was used in concepts of identity, we first have to say very quickly and very briefly that identity is not so much something of, let's say, how we feel or something like that, but it's commemorating a certain aspect of the past. But you don't commemorate just because of the past. There are various aspects. There's a whole discussion on what is commemoration actually about. We can read a lot about that. Commemoration of where you come from is basically not about where you come from, but is about what you are and what you claim to be and what you claim to be in the future. So it's about claiming your position. It's legitimation. It is a legitimation process. Now, something like that happened basically already in pre-modern times. Already the Hussites asked themselves, who are we? So, what is our concept of Reformation? And then we have the first image of Jan Hus. We have the first image of Jan Hus on the pyre. So, Hus is a saint for, and then of course, what is it? Some later, another concept Jan Hus included in the series of reformers, Wycliffe and Luther. So there is a relation between several reformers, but still, as you see on the bottom there, he is on the pyre. So he laid down his life. It's basically a classical form of sainthood. In the period mainly after the start of the Counter-Reformation, so the 17th century in Central Europe, when, let's say, alternative forms of Christianity had to disappear and many left this country. The effect was that Hus became a Protestant. I always say Hus became only a Protestant after the Battle of White Mountain, and we see that in the narrative of the Reformation in Germany, so Lutheran Reformation, Hus becomes someone who is like a father to Luther. Now, we have him here together in the most holy act of Christianity, namely during the liturgy, the Eucharist. And then we see stories, sort of, let's say, cartoons about the life of Luther. And there is also this meeting of Luther with Jan Hus, and that's the swan and the goose. Now, this is still including both, but in a later instance you would see only the swan as a sort of, okay, that is what we come from. There is a relation between those reformers. So reformers are those that, and then it comes, that are to spread the light. So this is about the concept of truth. Well, it's together, but it's at the same time polemic, because we see that the evil the papal Catholics are on the other lower side of the table trying to blow out the channel, so the light. This is a pre-modern type of identity and of nation, therefore. Politics are included as well. Frederick from the Palatine, here seen with his wife from England. So the Protestant nations together are joining, and you see in the back there the reformers, and they are chasing out of course, the Catholics, and this is all happening on the soil of Bohemia. So this is an early modern type of political connections to the notion of community, Christian nation. Something changes profoundly in the Enlightenment. Because the Enlightenment introduces something like a neutral public space, something that the pre-modern time did not know. And as such, therefore, the Enlightenment philosophy introduces something like a purposefulness. Religion, as other things in society, have to be of purpose to a higher good. So serving something. Therefore, there has also to be a mechanism of control of, over religion and over religious communities, because they are potentially also dangerous. They are not always meant, or they do not always want to play that serving role. The Reformation in this narrative, especially, of course, among the Protestant Enlightenment philosophers, becomes the moment that the cloud of the unknowing is being dissolved. As you see on that little picture there, the picture includes the reformers down, so that's some sort of allusion to what we have seen before. Reformers working together, but at the same time there is this female figure putting away this cloud of unknowing and giving us the light of the truth, obviously. Now, it's not only Protestants that came with this sort of knowledge-based idea of religion. Also in the Catholic Enlightenment you find similar things. This is the end of the 18th century from Bohemia, and there is a sort of an encyclopedia on all sorts of important religious figures, and from obviously from Bohemian history, and Hus is also included in this catalogue. Yes, he was not that good a Christian, but in the end he was really in property, as it says, of his mind and of the knowing. So therefore we have to remember him. One of the reactions to the Enlightenment is the rise of what we perhaps could call romantic idea of the nation. And the romantic idea of the nation is based on, has as a central point the Golden Age. Again, something that is not directly present in, let's say, pre-modern chronicles. There it's much more about how one nation or community is following the path of the church. Here it is about a golden age in the past, and then there was some disaster, and now we are working to get back on track again. So the golden age becomes a part of this Reformation narrative, because the Reformation was a moment that this golden age was either either ended, that is the Catholic concept obviously, or also that the Golden Age actually started after the Dark Middle Ages. In the Reformed or in the Reformation concept, obviously the Reformer is always connected to the nation, as we will see in a lot of pictures that are to follow, but also in the language. Because the Reformation, the classical reformer of the Reformation since the 19th century is always someone who translated the Bible. Even if he didn't, like Hus, he did in this narrative. And it is not about the Bible, but it's about the language. And that we see especially in the German tradition. So the reformer becomes a hero, as you see on those two pictures. Those are not the most famous pictures. It's still not Brožík, like in the Old Town Hall. But those, the one on the left is Hus, and the other one is Jerome. The reformer who is alone, who is standing there for the nation, obviously, and he is fighting against the oppression or struggling for that. So it's the hero as the central figure of the Reformation. Now, how do you depict such a reformer? Well, we have seen some paintings, but the public space is still a very open space in the beginning of the 19th century. There are not that many statues, and we need statues to remind ourselves of what actually we are and how religion is there included. So we go back to a form of an ancient or antique temple. That is the concept, the first drafts, let's say, those two of the very first statue of Martin Luther. So Martin Luther in the center, surrounded eventually as a Greek hero in his temple. And indeed, that also happened, namely in various places, especially in Wittenberg. So in Wittenberg, Luther has this little roof above himself, and that is basically the remains of an ancient temple. So the hero is on the market square or somewhere else, and especially then surrounded by other reformers eventually, but he is still on the top. He's not there because he had such a deep faith, but he is there because he became the personification of the nation. So religion and nation go at this point together. It's not so much different in the Czech context, because we all know these statues, at least the big one, and the effect of this secularization of religion was basically that what you see on the Old Town Square monument of Jan Hus, namely that there is no reference to religion whatsoever on that statue. Whatever you can say about Hus, he was a priest or he was a theologian, but certainly he was not a political leader, but he is there as a political leader and not as a priest. There is no theological reference whatsoever. Hus is the one that resurrects the nation. That's basically what this whole thing is about. Now, when you nationalize religion, then the effect is also that you secularize the nation. Namely, you invent all sorts of new rituals. And the rituals are basically religious rituals. You go on a pilgrimage, namely to the alleged place where Hus was born in this case, or where he died. And those are also organized as pilgrimages. So every aspect is there, and it's basically something like, not so much that we talk about Hus, but much more we talk about the nation and the nation as the nation of Hus. Now, the Protestants in this country tried to make use of this. Because we still speak about basically the public sphere, so about political debates on nation and religion. The Protestants tried to make use of that. As you see on that picture, this is 1925. Again, on the same side, on the Old Town Square, and we come together. Now we present ourselves to the nation, because we are now the nation of Hus, and we were there before, so we are something like the best of the best sons of the nation, of the Czech nation, and as such we have also to be respected. We kept alive the soul of the nation in the dark times of the Counter-Reformation. The final, or sort of the ultimate aspect of this whole debate of let's say, the nationalization of religion, and at the same time the sanctification of the nation, is that you build a cathedral. But the cathedral is not just a cathedral for God, for Christ, something related to theology, faith, or church, but it is a cathedral for the nation. And the interesting thing, obviously, is that this has very much yes, there it is. This is very much a classical cathedral structure, even with a crypt, and even with an altar-like structure. If you have ever been inside, it's the most interesting building, I think, for this purpose in Prague, and perhaps not only in this country, but in the wider context, let's say, of Central Europe. Even the doors do show us something about the, sort of a nationalized history of salvation. Sorry. So these doors, and that's of course an interesting aspect, are there since 1953, so that's communist times. But the communists did not do anything else than what was already available. And they made references to Hus as well. He's on the left side, high up there. So with Hus, the salvation history of the communist Czech nation starts, but at the end, I'm sorry, this does not work. Yeah. At the end, we are in the in utopia. So don't be surprised if someone goes to Jezolatka and says the religion is there because of me. This is the ultimate step that just was already in the making during much of the 20th century. So, what I think is important to do is to critically rethink biblical impulses, and perhaps also to acknowledge that the biblical notions that we find concerning nation are to a certain extent problematical, and have at least given quite some reason for problematical ideas about identity, and therefore also about religion. The same is true for theology and faith. How do we think about the chosen nation, therefore the church, about religion as to be told to others or to be missionized to others. And especially we should rethink how, as different confessional traditions, we have our claims to public space, because as we have seen, this is a two-way development. I don't think there is an easy answer. I don't think that there is something at hand by which we could sort of immunize religion against this type of instrumentalization. I don't think it's possible because also we or at least as far as we are somehow related to churches and church communities, we would like to be present in the public space and to have our influence. And basically there already things start. Perhaps, therefore, we should also think about what we mean when we say religion. Where does it start, but also where does it end? Thank you for your attention.